When we were kids, there was nothing more important than our friends. We played together, shared our food at lunchtime, and never hesitated to ask for help. It seemed like we would be best friends forever, but now it's all different. The only thing that matters is money. You can't imagine how quickly your friends will forget about you if you have problems. Even worse, they may treat you badly. Today, we'll talk about a man who learned this lesson the hard way. He once had a very dear friend, but he made him feel unwelcome in his own home. Mark and David had been friends since school. They did everything together, and it seemed like they were inseparable. One day, their teacher asked them to sit back and reflect on what they would do when they grew up. Mark said he wanted to become a businessman and make a lot of money, but David didn't share the same dream. He was happy with his life and just wanted to have fun. So he said, "I want to be a professional beach bum." They all laughed, except the teacher. She wasn't amused at all. "If you don't take this seriously," she said, "you won't get anywhere in life." Poor David felt embarrassed and looked down at his desk. Mark put his hand on his shoulder and said, "Don't listen to her, David. You can do whatever you want. Just remember, I'll always be your friend." And they both knew it was true. Years passed and the boys grew up. Mark became a businessman and had a beautiful wife and two great kids. But David still lived in a small apartment and had no one but his cat. He worked as a waiter in a small cafe and saved money to buy a boat. His dream was to travel around the world. One day, Mark called David and invited him over for dinner. It was the first time they had seen each other in a long time, and they had a lot to catch up on. But as soon as David arrived, Mark's wife greeted him coldly and said, "Why didn't you tell us you were coming? We would have ordered more food." Then she looked at her husband, who was busy talking on the phone. David understood that they weren't happy to see him. He tried to make small talk, but Mark just waved him off and said, "We're in the middle of something here. Just sit quietly and I'll be with you in a minute." David nodded slowly, feeling humiliated. After dinner, David took a cab home. He thought about Mark's words and realized that their friendship was over. It hurt him deeply because he still loved his friend. He couldn't understand why Mark had changed so much. Hadn't they promised to be friends forever? David sat by the window and stared at the moon. He was so upset that tears streamed down his face. Suddenly, he heard a knock at the door and opened it to find a bouquet of beautiful flowers. On the card, it read, "I'm sorry about tonight. I hope you'll forgive me. Your friend, Mark." David was confused. He picked up the flowers and wondered why Mark had apologized. Had he done something wrong? The next day, David went to the cafe where he worked. Usually, he loved his job because the customers were kind and friendly. But today, he couldn't focus on anything. He kept thinking about Mark's flowers and apology. Had he changed his mind about their friendship? As the evening approached, David decided to call Mark and ask him about the flowers. The phone rang several times before Mark finally picked up. "Hello," he said, sounding tired. "Hi, Mark. I was wondering why you apologized last night. Did I do something wrong?" Mark sighed and said, "You didn't do anything wrong. I just don't know how to tell you this. It's hard for me. Look, we've been friends for so long, but now things are different. I'm successful now, and you're not. People like me don't hang out with losers like you. You know, you're not on my level anymore." Those words hit David like a punch in the stomach. He couldn't believe what his friend had just said. How could Mark compare them like that? Didn't he know that money wasn't everything? David tried to say something, but Mark hung up on him. From that day on, Mark avoided David. Every time David called him, Mark came up with an excuse not to meet. David was devastated. He couldn't understand why his best friend would treat him so badly. He missed Mark terribly and hoped that they could go back to how things were before. He tried calling Mark every day, but it went straight to voicemail, so he decided to visit his friend. Mark lived in a luxurious house in an upscale neighborhood. As David walked up to the front door, he noticed that it was made of pure gold. He knocked timidly and waited. A moment later, the door opened and a maid said in a cold voice, "Yes, can I help you?" "Hi, I'm looking for Mark. May I come in?" The maid gave him a sharp look. "What do you want with Mr. Peterson?" "If you're here to ask for money, the answer is no." "He doesn't owe you anything?" "No, I didn't come to ask for money." "I just want to talk to Mark. Please let me in." "He's not here right now. If you insist, you can wait in the living room." David thanked her and stepped inside. The interior was even more dazzling than the exterior. There were expensive paintings on the walls, and a huge crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling. David sat down on a leather sofa and waited. After a few minutes, Mark entered the room. He looked different, colder, and more distant. "David, what are you doing here? I told you I'm not interested in meeting." "Yes, I know, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to ask you, why are you treating me like this? What did I do to you?" Mark sighed and said, "Look, let's just pretend we never met. I don't want to talk about it. Leave now and never contact me again." David stood up and said, "You may have a lot of money, Mark, but you're still the same selfish person you were in school. You don't care about anyone but yourself. I used to admire you, but now I see you for who you really are. Goodbye." With that, he turned and left. At that moment, David realized that Mark would never understand him. Their friendship meant nothing to Mark. He was too busy enjoying his success and didn't have time for people like David. David stepped out into the sunshine and breathed a deep breath of fresh air. He was sad, but also relieved. Now he knew the truth about his so-called friend. He didn't need Mark's money or his friendship. He was better off without him. Later that day, David boarded a ship and sailed away to a faraway land. He started a new life and found new friends who appreciated him for who he was. Meanwhile, Mark spent his days counting his money and his nights alone in bed. He had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of, but it seemed like something was missing. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something important, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He was successful in business, but his personal life was a mess. No one understood him. He had no one to talk to. All his attempts to make new friends failed. Mark tried to buy people's friendship with money, but it didn't work. He was rich, but he was also lonely. Looking back, Mark realized that he had made a terrible mistake. He had let his greed and selfishness ruin his life. He remembered his friend David and how he had always been there for him. He had been loyal, honest, and true. Mark had pushed him away because he was jealous of his friend's happiness. Mark had wanted to keep all the success and money for himself, but it hadn't made him happy. In fact, it had made him miserable. Now, many years later, Mark was old and sick. He regretted everything he had done. He wished he could turn back time and be friends with David again, but it was too late. David was gone, and Mark was all alone. So remember, it's not the money that matters most in life. True friendship is more valuable than anything else. We should appreciate our friends while we have them and never take them for granted. Otherwise, we may lose them forever.